we are less than 5% of the world's population, but we are almost 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Okay, roughly 300 million out of 6.5 billion or so. We rank first in the world in the per capita incarceration of our fellow citizens. First in the world, right? The Russians keep huffing and puffing trying to beat us. We have less them in the dust. We are number one. And we lock up people at a rate that is 5 to 10 times the rate of most other countries in Europe, Canada, what have. 5 to 10 times the rate. Ask yourself, why? Why? Are we so much more evil than other people? Is that what's going on? But quite frankly, if you look at it, our rates of nonviolent crime are roughly the same as a lot of those other societies. Our rates of illicit drug use, despite what you hear, are not that different. A little higher, but in some cases a little lower than a lot of these other societies as well. Our rates of violent crime are somewhat higher, but that's not who's still in the prisons, right? What we do in our country is we are faster to put people behind bars. We almost regard it as a moral imperative to put people behind bars if they violate one of these laws here. Once they're behind bars, we keep them behind bars for longer than almost any other society does. And once they come out, we make it much more easier to throw them back in for a dirty urine, a failure to show up with your parole officer, whatever the thing might be. And we treat them as second and third class citizens, oftentimes for the rest of their lives. They may not be able to vote, or it's hard to get the right to vote. They may not have access to scholarships, or to public benefits, or housing, or for food for their kid. They may not have access to. They may not be able to get a license, be trained to become a barber behind bars, and then you can't get a license to become a barber. I mean, ludicrous, crazy stuff. Now, we have developed a form of exceptionalism in this regard that we're not aware of. When we talk, and when more and more people now are talking about sort of prison reform, criminal justice reform, yes, we have too many people behind bars, we can't afford it anymore, building new prisons was the fastest growing item in the Montana state budget and many other state budgets in the 80s and 90s and into the last decade. But what we do is when we look for reform, we go, let's see what that other state is doing. Let's do that. And that's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do, because you guys are about roughly in the average when it comes to per capita incarceration. Maybe a little below average, but about the same as my state, New York. Right? But we don't stop to think and step back and go, what's the rest of the world doing with this stuff? Why is it that other countries, roughly similar rates of nonviolent crime or drug use, that they have 1/4, 1/5, 1/7 our incarceration rate? And by the way, it's not that they're all culturally or racially homogeneous. Now Europe is a hobgoblin of immigrant populations. You read all the stuff in the newspapers. It's getting as diverse as America is. And with all the ethnic and class issues and poverty issues mixed in, it's not like homogeneity city. I mean, maybe Japan to some extent, but not much of the rest of the world. It's understanding that we're doing something here and we've lost perspective. We've lost this perspective on our tragic exceptionalism, our reliance on the criminal justice system and incarceration in a way that no democratic society in history has ever done, and that no other society around the world today is doing. That we are incarcerating people at a rate that exceeds or approximates the rate of incarceration in the Soviet gulags of the 30s and 40s and 50s, and that the rate of incarceration, especially of African American dark-skinned men in this country, vastly exceeds the rate of incarceration in the Soviet gulags or apartheid South Africa. And that it's not just incarceration. It's not just those 2.3 million people behind bars tonight in a local jail or a state or federal prison. In addition, it's the over 5 million people in the supervision of parole and probation systems. Right? Also, I think that's also an area where we have the highest per capita parole and probation rates in the world. Right? A surveillance of 7-odd million people in this country. Now, this has also been a dramatic increase. In 1980, it was 500,000 people behind bars. Now it's 2.3, a quadrupling effectively. Right? Ask what's driving it. Not only is the mindset that, yes, prison's there to punish people, and that if you break a law, you must be punished. Right? Not only is it because we lost sight of the notion that our number one priority should be to keep nonviolent people out of prison, if at all possible. To find other ways to hold them accountable, to find other ways to punish them, but to do whatever we can, not to put people into these prisons where they are exposed to other criminals, oftentimes real criminals, where they come out with a criminal record, where their chance of getting employment is automatically reduced dramatically, where they've severed relationships with families and kids, where we've derailed them oftentimes for life. It's not just that. It's also our mentality around drugs. It is the drug war. It is the presumption that criminalization and the criminal justice system must be front and center in dealing with drugs. Not as drugs, not, booze. There it's only if you get behind the wheel of a car and you're drunk. Not tobacco or cigarettes, and then we're reaching up that way, and maybe if you light up in a kindergarten playground, they might arrest you, but we're not there yet, right? But on the other hand, these other drugs, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, blah, 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 I mean, unless they got some kind of prescription from some of you, which sometimes you can't even get any of these things, well, they're a criminal. They're a criminal. And we don't distinguish between the non-destructive use of drugs in our law and the highly destructive use of drugs. We don't distinguish between the harm that one does to himself and the harm that one does to others in these things. We don't distinguish. We treat the person who simply uses the drugs in the privacy of their own home the same as a drunk driver under our criminal laws. Sometimes even more. Sometimes the penalty for possession of an amount of methamphetamine or marijuana or heroin or a pharmaceutical opioid without a prescription in the privacy of your own home gets punished more severely than the drunk driver who could be on the road and putting our lives or our children's lives at stake. That's bizarre. I haven't stopped to think about it, most people, but that is the nature of this law. There were 50,000 people behind bars for a drug charge in 1980. There are now 500,000 people behind bars today for violating a drug law. Let me put that in some perspective. We're locking up as many people for violating a drug law today as we locked up for everything in 1980. Now, our population hasn't grown that fast. We're locking up more people for a drug law violation in America than all of Western Europe locks up for everything. And they got 100 million more people than we do. So just some perspective on this.